Hello, my dear students. Today, I'd like to deliver another lecture on United Nations and Millennium Development Goals. So, in this particular lecture, I'd like to basically highlight about some reforms of United Nations organizations and its relation to Millennium Development Goals and in presently the Sustainable Development Goals. Because nowadays from Millennium Development Goals it's transformed itself into Sustainable Development Goals. So my lecture based on these three specific issues: the reform of United Nations, then to some extent Millennium Development Goals, and more specifically on later on the Sustainable Development Goals. Regarding United Nations organizations, I do believe that you have already collected a lot of information, a lot of literatures, a lot of materials, and you all know about the history of United Nations organizations, about different organs of United Nations organization, about the logic behind the establishment of United Nations organization, aims and objectives of United Nations organization, the evaluation of United Nations organization, their success stories of United Nations organizations. So these things are very much common, and you might experience in all these things from your degree courses as well. So I don't want to go in more details about these facts, but rather I'd like to highlight what should be done in terms of strengthening the capacity of United Nations organizations. So at first, I'd like to start my deliberation with 2-3 lines about the logic behind the establishment of United Nations organization. After that, I'll move towards the other issues. But before that, I'd like to tell you whether you have gone through my 2 previous lecture, one on global security and another on this US hegemony. Because it is very much important that you must understood each and every concepts, because your examination will be held tentatively after this serious situation, the COVID-19 and this crisis situation will over. And I do believe that it will we all can able to overcome this crisis situation very soon. So I do believe that in a positive mindset, I do believe that the normalcy will come very soon. So after that, obviously your examination will be held. So you have to prepare accordingly. So you need to go through each and every videos, listen to them carefully, try to understand, try to interpret which the availabilities of your own materials, and the materials I also provide you different soft copies. So try to interpret my lecture with those materials and try to understand and try to make some sense. So regarding this United Nations organizations, it came into existence in 1945 and 24th October, we all know. But prior to that, if we're talking about the history of United Nations organizations, it's basically talking about this 1941, this Atlantic Charter. Then where this Roosevelt stated his great 4 freedom speech: freedom of religion, freedom of speech and expression, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. Then again in Dumbarton Oxford in 1944, this Yalta Conference in 1943, the San Francisco Conference in 1944. These are the remarkable developments These are the background development of this formation of this United Nations organization. And finally, in 1945, 26 June, this UN Charter, the draft of the UN Charter came into existence. After signing by the 50th member countries of United Nations organization, and Poland was the 51st signatories of United Nations organizations. And subsequently from 1945, after accepting this UN Charter from 1945, 24th October, these United Nations organizations became operative. So from that time onwards till today, this United Nations organization basically tried the level based in terms of establishing international peace and security in the entire world. But they at the initial stage they fix some sort of objectives, some sort of purposes, principles. So the basic objectives of United Nations organization is basically based on the establishment of international peace and security in the entire world. Then secondly, to save the succeeding generation from the scars of war. Then thirdly, to reaffirm faith upon whole human dignity. So in that way, from that time onwards, this United Nations organization, played a very significant role. But in some occasion, they are struggling. As an international forum, sometimes this United organization fail to do justice with the people. Though they have a lot of success stories, but on some occasion they became a total failure. So need of the hour is to re-examine the existing structure of United Nations organizations, the strengthening capacity of United Nations organizations, whether there are some sort of reform is essential or not. There's a kind of debate arise in terms of changing the structure of the Security Council. There's a genuine urge from these middle level powerful countries to change the present structure of Security Council. That means this increasing the number of permanent member of Security Council. Presently we have 5 permanent members, and there are 10 non-permanent members which are elected from among the member countries after 2 years. But there's an increasing demand from the middle level powers to increase this P5 concept from P5 to some extent maximize. So in that context, there are lots of debate arises. But till today we don't have the changing structure of United Nations organizations. From 1945 onwards to till today, this United Nations organization contributed vehemently in terms of doing justice with the people, and in different occasions and during the time of different secretary general, there are lots of reforms also going on. So I'd like to highlight some issues. This even facing stiff challenges in the present century, specifically in the 21st century, with its authority that being questioned. And the reason behind its question as a result of changing world politics, specifically in the age of globalization, the post-Cold War phenomena, and more specifically in 21st centuries, new concept developed, and then more specifically as a result of the changing character of these dominant forces, like the character of this United States of America, the character of this China. And this Cold War period was more devastating in characters. So in different circumstances from 1945 to till today, there's a kind of increasing demand in terms of reform, in terms of changing character of United Nations organizations. Because in some occasion, this United Nations organization became total failure. So for example, this problem of Kosovo in Serbia, this US invasion in Iraq and Afghanistan, we all have been experiencing with these interventions. US intervention in Iraq both in 1991 and again in 2001. In 2003. Then again this US intervention in Afghanistan in 2001 after this Taliban's attack, Al-Qaeda's attack in WTC in Pentagon. Then during the time of question of Soviet occupation in Afghanistan in 1979, that means during the time of Cold War, and bombing in Chechnya and Georgia. These are some sort of examples where this United Nations organization became total failure. So their authority has been questioned. In 1977, the Atlantic Council Working Group on the UN proposed a number of reform strategies to revitalize the working of the UN, and they proposed, some new reform strategies. Number one, strengthening of the machinery of the Pacific settlement of disputes. Then Secretary General to be allowed to use his full authority in international diplomacy. Then development of international bodies. And fourthly, effective relationship between United Nations and non-governmental organizations. So these are some sort of reformative strategies provided by Atlantic Charter Working Group in 1977 as a result of the demand from the member states, as a result of the international community in terms of, strengthening the capacity of United Nations organizations. Then this Boutros Ghali, who was the Secretary General of United Nations Organization, he developed a program that is Agenda for Peace, which contributed a lot in terms of international peace and security. Then again, this Brahmi report, which basically focused on shortcomings in the existing system. Then secondly, frank and realistic recommendations for change. Then political and strategic issues, operational and organizational issues. So these are some sort of viewpoint which highlighted by Brahmi report, which basically focused on restructuring the existing structure of United. His analyzing the contribution made by this Kofi Annan. I'd like to highlight all the Secretary Generals of United Nations organizations. The first Secretary General was the Stragville from Norway, and he occupied offices from 1945 to 1952. Then the second one, this Dag Hammarskjöld from Sweden from 1952 to 1961. Then number three, this U Thant was the third Secretary General of United Nations Organization. He was from Burma, presently Myanmar, from 1961 to 1971. Then fourthly, this Kurt Wilhelm, he was from Austria from the year 1972 to 1981. Then fifthly, Xavier Perez de Cuellar, he was from Peru from 1982 to 1991. Then sixthly, Boutros Ghali, he was from Egypt from the year 1992 to 1996. Then Kofi Annan from Ghana from 1997 to 2006. After that, Ban Ki-moon from South Korea from 2007 to 2016. And presently, Antonio Guterres, he occupied office. He was from Portugal, occupied office in Texas from 1st January 2017 till today. He was, the ninth Secretary General of United Nations Organization. So in that way, we have this different sorts of Secretary General who contributed a lot, in terms of, delivering services by United Nations Organization and the international forum to look after the security issues, the justice issues, the rights issues, and many more things to be, applicable for the entire world. During the time of Kofi Annan, the United Nations organizations, started a Millennium Development Goal. And these goals are considered as Millennium Development Goals because it was fixed in the year 2000. That is the reason why these are considered as Millennium Development Goals. From 1990s onwards, under the banner of United Nations Organization, this UNDP came into existence, and under the banner of this UNDPs, each and every year, this UNDPs prepares their annual Human Development Report. So this report basically highlighted the success and failure stories of each and every member countries of United Nations organizations. And it was observed that from 1990s to 2000, each and every member, except these developed regions, the other developing and underdeveloped regions face a lot of trouble. Even some developed countries also face trouble in terms of some, aspects of the human being, which is directly related to the human capability, directly related to the competitive indexes. So after observing all those annual report from 1990s to 2000, these United Nations organizations came to the conclusion to prepare a Millennium Development Goal, to fix certain kind of goals specifically to be followed by each and every member countries of United Nations organization, and more specifically by the underdeveloped and developing countries, to be fulfill this goal by 2015, so that they can show some sort of prosperity in terms of hunger, in terms of poverty, in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of economic development, in terms of health, different sorts of pandemic issues, in terms of environmental issues, many more things. Because from 1990s to 2000, lots of debate arises in health sector, in environmental sector, in education sector, in energy sector, each and every sectors. A lot of competition develop, a lot of debate arises, and as a result of that, this United Nations organization fixed certain kind of target in this new millennium in 2000 to be fulfilled by each and every countries who are lacking in terms of their annual development, human development report, and they have to fulfill this minimum target by 2015. And accordingly, this United Nations organization in 2000, during the time of Secretary General of this Kofi Annan, fixed this Millennium Development, 8 Millennium Development Goals, and these 8 Millennium Development Goals are: number one, to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, because this poverty and hunger is very crucial for human fulfillment, for human development, for this human mankind, so for this human dignity, for the standard of life. This poverty always plays a very significant role, poverty and hunger. So these problems need to be overcome. Then secondly, to achieve universal primary education. As a result of lack of educations, as a result of this illiteracy, even in the age of globalization, we get liberalized, but somewhere down the line, we fail to become competitive, capable, educative, knowledgeable, informative in characters, because in the age of globalization it's become an informatic society. So the concept of education also became universalistic in characters. Then third one, to promote gender equality and empowerment. Then fourthly, to reduce child mortality. Then fifthly, to improve maternal health. Sixthly, to combat HIV/AIDS, malaria and other diseases. Then seventhly, to ensure environmental sustainability. And eighthly, to develop a global partnership for development. So these are the 8 Millennium Development Goals to be fixed by United Nations organization in 2000. And along with these 8 Millennium Development Goals, they also fix 18 different targets and 48 indicators, and later on its indicator become 54. So later on, there are 8 Millennium Development Goals. From 18, initially it was 18 numbers of target, later it's become 21 targets and 54 indicators. So on the basis of this 21 target and 54 indicators, each and every member country implemented different policies to fulfill this target by 2015. For example, in the context of India, say for example, regarding this goal number 1, to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, this government of India, initiated different plans and policies, this public distribution system, this different sorts of employment opportunities as well. Say for example, this Mahatma Gandhi National Employment Guarantee Act, MGNREGA. This is considered to be the finest example of this for the fulfillment of the goal number 1. Then secondly, to achieve the universal primary education in the context of India, this Sarva Shiksha vision came into the forefront to fulfill this particular target. So for each and every target, each and every member countries of United Nations Organization, they set certain kind of policies, they implement certain kind of policies, and accordingly they proceed. In the health sector as well, in the context of India, this National Rural Health Mission. Then again, this National Rural Livelihood Mission, NRLM, also came into existence. In terms of maternal mortality and child mortality rate, this health sector came into the forefront. Regarding the environmental issues as well, there are different sorts of board came into existence. Different board created. They suggested different recommendation to overcome this problem of environmental degradation, the pollution. So in that way, each and every member countries did a lot to fulfill these Millennium Development Targets. But some of the member countries, in most cases, the member countries belonging to developing and underdeveloped countries, they failed to fulfill this target by 2015. And a result of which, this Millennium Development Goals was transformed itself from these 8 Millennium Development Goals. In 2015, it was, make a kind of paradigmatic shift by setting 17 numbers of new sustainable development goals so that these countries can be sustained with 169 numbers of targets based on 6P concept. Because by 2015, mostly these developing and underdeveloped countries failed to fulfill those targets. So in front of the developing and underdeveloped countries, there must be some sort of new target so that they can develop that particular genuine instinct, to compete, to work more hard in terms of sustainability. Because the question of sustainable development, plays a very significant role. Sustainability is more important for the survival, for the qualitative development of the entire world. Is sustainable development is very much important. So this United Nations Organization in 2015, set another 17th number of sustainable development goals along with 169 numbers of target to be fulfilled by each and every member countries of United Nations Organization by the end of 2030. And this particular 17 sustainable development goal based on 6P concept. And what is this 6P concept? It is nothing but preamble, people, peace, planet, prosperity, and partnership. Started with a preamble that should be followed by each and every countries. And all those goals for the people. It was for the people or the whole universe. These sustainable development goals for what purpose? For the establishment of peace. Peace for what? Peace for the humanities. It is for the sustainable development goals since it's talking about these environmental issues as well. So it's also talking about the entire planet as well. It's talking about ecology. It's talking about whole universe. It's talking about, the balanced growth, ecological growth, sustainable growth of the inclusive growth of the entire world. And then can only, the world become more prosperous in character. So this prosperities also came into existence. So the peace, prosperity of the entire planet will only be possible if, each and every countries go hand in hand by developing some sort of partnership. So the whole concept of this 17 sustainable development goals is based on the 6P, which is preamble, people, peace, planet, prosperity, and partnership. So it set 17 number of, sustainable development goals. These are no poverty, number 1. Second one, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, fifthly, life on land, peace, justice and strong institution, and lastly, partnership for the goals. So these 17 numbers of sustainable development goals, covers each and every aspect of human life, each and every aspects of the planet. which are directly or indirectly related to the human prosperity, human life, for the establishment of peace, for the whole humanities, for the whole planet, for the whole, this life system, or the whole universe, or ecological systems. Because until and unless we cannot follow this balanced growth system, inclusive growth system, sustainable developmental models, it may not be possible for the human mankind to sustain for a longer period. Since we are talking about qualitative development, since we are talking about this proper development, since we are talking about equity, since we are talking about social justice, since we are talking about equal development of each and every regions, so for that is the reason why the sustainable development goals plays a very significant role for the proper human prosperities, for the proper development of each and every region, and at the same time, for the proper prosperous and stability of the entire world, entire planet, so that human mankind can sustain for a longer period in this beautiful world. So, in that way, these sustainable development goals were set. These sustainable development goals to be fulfilled by each and every member countries by 2030. So in that way, each and every member countries initiated new projects, new plans, new policies, and accordingly, this United Nations organization, along with these member countries of United Nations organizations, they try to proceed in the right directions. So this is all about United Nations Organization Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals. And if I request all of you to go through, different literatures which are available in internet, and I'll also provide some material as well. I have already, provide some materials, and I will provide some new materials as well regarding these sustainable development goals. And hope with that amount of materials and this, discussions, you can able to understand, about MDGs, about SDGs, and how this MDGs and SDGs are related to this United Nations organizations. Apart from that, I request all of you to go through different another literatures as well, so that you can gain new ideas. So try to make it a practice, read more, because in the age of this, during the spread of this coronavirus and pandemic COVID-19, we are in a very crisis situations, so we have to stay home, but at the same time we rigorously concentrated our study. That is more important. So by staying at home safely, you have to concentrate on your study. So I do believe that you please go through these videos, try to understand, try to make some sense, and if you have any queries, please ask me any questions, and I am ready to answer. So thank you very much once again. Stay safe and stay home. Thank you.